Part 4. You will hear part of a lecture about urban heat islands.
In this lecture, we'll look at a phenomenon that many of you have experienced without necessarily naming it. Cities often stay warmer than the areas around them. Scientists call this the urban heat island effect, and it matters because it can turn a warm summer into a health risk for large numbers of people. Now, you might assume this is mainly a daytime problem. After all, that's when the sun is strongest. But what I mean by an island of heat is a difference that often becomes most noticeable after sunset. If you compare a dense city center with nearby open land, the city commonly cools more slowly. In practical terms, you might see a gap of 2 or 3 degrees between an inner district and the countryside, especially on calm, cloudless nights. So why does the city hold on to warmth? Let's break it down. The first reason is surface materials. Natural ground can release heat efficiently, particularly when it contains moisture. Urban surfaces are different. They are often dark, dense, and designed for durability rather than cooling. Roads are the classic example. Just to be clear, it isn't that every road behaves the same way, but tarmac tends to absorb a great deal of solar energy during the day and then release it slowly later, keeping nearby air warmer into the evening. A second factor is the shape of the built environment. In areas with tall buildings packed closely together, wind movement can be reduced. Hot air gets trapped, and streets behave like channels that hold heat rather than letting it disperse. Let's take a quick example. If you walk from a tree-lined street into a narrow road between high blocks, you can feel the temperature change within a minute, even though you've only moved a short distance. Third, there's greenery, or the lack of it. Plants cool the air in a way that concrete cannot. They move water from soil and leaves into the atmosphere, and that process removes heat from the surface. The scientific term is evaporation. If a neighborhood has fewer trees and less exposed soil, it loses that cooling route and becomes more prone to higher temperatures. We should also mention heat produced by daily activity. Cars, buses, machinery, and cooling units release warm air directly. Now, it would be a mistake to say this is the main cause of the urban heat island effect, but during busy periods, it can intensify the warmth already stored in buildings and roads. What are the consequences? On a pleasant summer day, the urban heat island effect may only mean a stuffy evening. The more serious impacts appear during heat waves, when the baseline temperature is already high. At that point, extra warmth in cities increases strain on the body, particularly for older people, infants, and anyone with heart or breathing conditions. Nights are crucial here. If temperatures remain high after dark, the body has less time to recover. Energy use is another key issue. When evenings stay warm, people run fans or air conditioning for longer. If many households do this at once, demand rises sharply and can put pressure on the electricity grid. Urban warmth can also worsen air quality. Higher temperatures can cause polluted air to hang around for longer, and this increases urban smog, the hazy mixture that reduces visibility and can irritate the lungs, especially for people with asthma. In other words, heat doesn't just feel unpleasant, it can change what you breathe. So, what can cities do? The encouraging point is that solutions do not require a single dramatic invention. Instead, they involve combining several practical changes. One option is to increase greenery where it will cool people's everyday routes, along streets, near schools, and around housing. Another option is to rethink rooftops. Some councils support rooftop gardens, not simply for appearance, but because they can reduce indoor temperatures and cool the air immediately above buildings. Surface color matters too. Dark roofs absorb heat. Lighter surfaces reflect more sunlight. Some cities have trialed reflective coatings using a durable pale paint designed to withstand weather. These coatings can lower roof temperatures and reduce indoor heat buildup, cutting the need for mechanical cooling. Transport policy can contribute as well. Vehicles release heat directly, in addition to emissions. If a city reduces car dependence and encourages walking, cycling, and public transport, there is less heat released into the street environment. It's not a quick fix, but it's part of a broader strategy. Finally, we need to identify where interventions will have the biggest effect. Heat is not evenly spread across a city. Some streets are shaded, others are exposed and paved. Increasingly, planners combine local readings from fixed sensors with mapping software to show which blocks store the most heat. That allows cities to target the hottest zones and prioritize changes where they will have the greatest benefit. To summarize, urban heat islands are driven by heat-absorbing materials, the shape of streets, reduced vegetation, and human activity. They increase risk during hot periods, raise energy demand, and can worsen air pollution. But with targeted greening, reflective surfaces, smarter travel choices, and careful monitoring, cities can reduce long-lasting urban warmth and make summer conditions safer.
Part 4. You will hear a lecturer giving a talk on antibiotic resistance and the measures used to slow its spread. Good morning. Today's lecture looks at antibiotic resistance in a simple sequence: how resistance begins, why it accelerates, the influence of farming, and what measures tend to slow it down. To start with the biology, antibiotics treat bacterial infections. They do not work on viruses, although that distinction is often misunderstood. Resistance is sometimes described as bacteria learning, but that is misleading. The process begins with chance. Bacteria reproduce rapidly, and small genetic changes occur naturally. These are called mutations. Most changes have no useful effect, but occasionally one makes a bacterium less affected by a drug, for example, by altering the target the drug is meant to attach to. A mutation alone is not enough to create a widespread problem. The key step is selection. When antibiotics are present, the bacteria that are easiest to kill are removed first. The more tolerant ones survive and reproduce, and over time the resistant type becomes more common. So antibiotics don't invent resistance, they favor bacteria that already have an advantage. Now, moving on to human behavior. A major driver is increased exposure to antibiotics, and that exposure is often linked to a particular assumption, the belief that antibiotics are the right response whenever someone feels unwell. A familiar example is a viral illness. Someone has a sore throat or cough and assumes antibiotics will speed recovery, even though they cannot treat a virus. Clinicians face pressures too: short appointments, anxious patients, and uncertainty. A just-in-case prescription can feel cautious, but across a community it raises exposure and strengthens selection. There is also unsupervised use. People keep leftover tablets and take them later, or accept medication from family members. Some reduce doses to avoid side effects. Actually, I should say they think it is safer, without realizing that weak exposure can allow tougher bacteria to survive. These habits are common enough to have a population-level effect. A related issue is duration. Many patients stop taking antibiotics as soon as symptoms improve. They think it's basically gone and discontinue. But not completing the full regimen can leave the most robust bacteria alive. Those survivors can multiply again and may be passed on. I'm not suggesting one missed dose instantly creates resistance. It's repeated early stopping that increases risk. Let's turn to influences beyond human medicine. Antibiotic use in agriculture affects resistance patterns. In many systems, large numbers of livestock are raised together. Where animals are kept close, infections spread quickly, so producers may use antibiotics routinely. The crucial distinction is between treating illness and preventing outbreaks. When antibiotics are given to healthy animals in advance, that preventative medication is known as prophylaxis, and it is not the same as vaccination. Vaccines prime immunity. Prophylaxis is drug use before disease appears. While it can reduce losses in the short term, it increases exposure and can encourage resistant strains to develop. At this stage, some people propose stopping antibiotics entirely. That sounds decisive, but it isn't realistic. Antibiotics remain essential in modern healthcare for surgery, neonatal care, and severe infections. The practical goal is to reduce unnecessary use and improve targeting. So, what tends to work in hospitals? The most established approach is antimicrobial stewardship. The term sounds administrative, but the practice is routine. Choose an appropriate drug, use it for an appropriate length of time, and review the decision when results arrive. A seriously ill patient may start on a broad antibiotic immediately because delay could be dangerous. Later, once the organism is identified, treatment can be narrowed or stopped. A second intervention is feedback. Hospitals sometimes call this monitoring, but the more precise method is benchmarking, comparing prescribing patterns across similar wards. The comparison has to be fair, otherwise staff dismiss the report. When like is compared to like, clinicians are more willing to adjust habits, and unnecessary prescribing can fall without harming outcomes. Next, antibiotics and resistant bacteria can enter the environment through sewage. Often people say wastewater. I should say sewage is the route I'm emphasizing because it combines discharge from households, farms, and healthcare facilities. Treatment plants remove a great deal, but not every trace. Finally, what makes policy effective? Education helps, but education alone rarely changes routines. Change is more reliable when there are clear incentives, funding for rapid tests, staffing support for infection control, and systems that make the recommended action the easiest one. Even with incentives, the biggest barrier is uptake, whether staff actually adopt guidance consistently under pressure. To sum up, resistance begins with chance variation, accelerates through selection under antibiotic exposure, is influenced by healthcare and farming, and is slowed most effectively by stewardship, fair comparisons of prescribing, and policies that make uptake realistic.
Part 4. You will hear a lecturer talking about volcano warning systems.
Today's lecture looks at volcano warning systems. I'm going to outline their main aims, describe several monitoring techniques that are commonly used to judge changes in volcanic activity, and then consider why warning the public is not simply a scientific problem, but also a social one. Let me start with what warning systems are meant to achieve. The central goal is to reduce fatalities.
Put simply, they exist to prevent loss of life by providing early warnings to people who live within reach of volcanic hazards, such as ash fall, gas emissions, landslides, and in some cases, fast-moving flows. It's worth stressing that a warning is not always a prediction. Often it is a risk statement based on evidence that the volcano is becoming more unstable. A second objective is to support decision-making by local authorities. Once the risk rises, officials may need to prepare emergency services, open shelters, manage traffic routes, and coordinate a large-scale relocation of residents. In practice, this usually means organizing an evacuation, and the effectiveness of that evacuation often depends on how much time is available. Turning now to the scientific basis of these systems, it's important to recognize that monitoring rarely relies on a single indicator. Volcanoes differ widely, so a combination of methods is typically used, and the overall pattern is often more informative than any one measurement. A key area of monitoring is ground deformation. When pressure increases beneath a volcano, the surface may inflate or it may tilt slightly as underground material shifts. These changes can be extremely small, sometimes measured in millimeters, yet they can be detected with instruments installed on the slopes of the volcano. One of the standard devices for this purpose is tilt meters, which record very small changes in the angle of the ground over time. If a consistent tilting trend is observed over days or weeks, it may indicate that pressure is accumulating below the surface. However, scientists interpret deformation carefully because rainfall, changes in groundwater, and unstable terrain can also produce movement. As a result, deformation data is usually evaluated alongside gas and seismic information. The second area is gas monitoring. Volcanic gases can escape through vents and fractures, and shifts in gas output may reflect changes deeper in the system. Many programs track sulfur dioxide, but some also monitor radon. Radon occurs naturally in certain rocks and soils, and rising levels can suggest that new cracks are forming, allowing gases to move more easily through the ground. That said, radon can also vary due to environmental conditions, such as temperature and air pressure, so a single spike is not typically treated as decisive. Instead, long-term trends are compared with other indicators. The third method involves analyzing underground vibrations. Volcanic systems can produce distinctive seismic signals, ranging from clusters of small earthquakes to continuous tremor. These vibrations may be associated with rising magma, which can fracture rock as it forces its way through narrow channels. By examining the depth and location of the shaking and how these features change over time, scientists can estimate whether magma is moving upward, remaining at depth, or migrating in another direction. This is particularly important because certain seismic patterns have been observed repeatedly before eruptions at some volcanoes. Once evidence suggests increasing risk, the challenge becomes communication. Many authorities use a color-coded alert system because it allows technical assessments to be translated into an easily recognizable public message. In this approach, the colors indicate how severe the current hazard is. The advantage is speed. Residents do not need to interpret scientific graphs. Nevertheless, color levels are only useful if they are tied to practical instructions, for example, whether people should prepare to leave, avoid specific zones, or follow designated routes. As for how warnings are delivered, methods vary depending on infrastructure. In some areas, updates may be broadcast on radio, sent by text message, or posted through official channels online. However, in rural districts or where phone networks are unreliable, authorities often rely on more direct approaches.
These include sirens and mobile public address systems, essentially vehicles fitted with loudspeakers, which can travel through communities and repeat clear instructions. This is particularly useful when people are outdoors or when households are dispersed. A further issue, which has become increasingly recognized in disaster planning, is that messages must be culturally sensitive. Effective warnings take into account local languages, trusted community figures, and previous experience of emergencies. In some settings, residents may respond more quickly when information is delivered through local leaders rather than external officials. In others, overly technical language can cause confusion, or certain phrases may be interpreted in ways that reduce compliance. Warning systems that ignore these factors may fail even when the scientific evidence is strong. Finally, there are two persistent problems. The first is that volcanic activity is not always preceded by obvious warning signs. Some eruptions occur with few clear precursors, meaning the available evidence may be weak, ambiguous, or appear only shortly before the event. This limits the amount of time authorities can realistically provide. The second problem concerns trust. Authorities must decide how early to issue warnings, knowing that warnings can disrupt daily life. If communities experience repeated messages that do not result in an eruption, they may become skeptical. Consequently, public confidence can be undermined by frequent alerts, particularly when these lead to economic costs, such as closing businesses or temporarily relocating families. So, to conclude, warning systems aim to reduce fatalities by issuing early warnings and to support evacuation planning. They rely on deformation measurements with tilt meters, gas monitoring, including radon, and seismic analysis linked to magma movement. But their success heavily depends on how information is communicated and whether communities continue to trust the system.
Part 4. You will hear a lecturer talking about discharge medication check. Today, I want to talk about medication reconciliation at hospital discharge. It sounds administrative, but it affects safety in a very direct way. Discharge may seem routine. A patient receives a prescription, some papers, and a short explanation, then goes home. In reality, it is a transfer of responsibility from the hospital team to the patient and primary care. At any transfer, details can be lost, and medicines are where that loss often shows up. To begin with, consider what happens during admission. Medicines are often changed. A drug may be stopped because it clashes with a new treatment. Another may be added temporarily to control symptoms. Doses may be adjusted as the patient improves, and some items may be replaced with hospital alternatives. When the patient leaves, they are given written information about these changes, but it may be unclear. The language can be technical. The list may not match what the patient was taking at home, and there may be more than one document. If the patient receives two lists that differ by even one item, they may guess which is correct or combine them. These problems are especially common for patients with long-term chronic conditions. They may already have complex routines and prescriptions from several places. A hospital specialist may alter one drug while a general practitioner manages the long-term list. Even if each change makes sense, the final set of instructions can be difficult to follow, especially when the patient is tired, anxious, or in pain. Now I will explain what medication reconciliation involves. It aims to prevent that confusion. Staff produce the most accurate list of what the patient should be taking, then compare it with what is prescribed on discharge. The key is the comparison. It forces the team to spot differences and decide whether each one is intended. Timing matters as well. Some staff aim to do the final check on the morning of discharge because that feels efficient, but within 24 hours of discharge is usually better. If the check is done too early, later changes will be missed. If it is done too late, there is no time to fix errors. Before I describe the program, it is useful to be clear about the typical errors. One common error is omission. A regular medicine that should continue is missing from the discharge list. This can happen when a long-term medicine was paused during acute treatment and then never put back. Another common error is the wrong dosage. The right medicine is listed, but the amount or frequency is wrong. For example, once daily instead of twice daily. A third pattern is duplication. The same medicine appears twice because one entry uses a brand name and another uses the generic name. Patients may take both because they think they are different. With that in mind, one hospital introduced a simple program to reduce these problems, and it followed 4 steps. First, staff built a reliable medication history. They did not rely only on the hospital record. They spoke to the patient and, when possible, to a family member who helps with medicines. They also checked community pharmacy records. Some teams started with the clinic summary, but the GP list was more reliable as a baseline for medicines taken before admission, especially for patients with several prescribers. Second, staff identified mismatches and classified them. Many people assumed the main problem was the handover to primary care after discharge. However, the strongest factor in this hospital was poor communication during shift changes on the ward. Decisions were made during one shift, then not recorded clearly enough for the next team. By the time discharge paperwork was prepared, a dose change could look like a mistake, or an intended restart could be missed. Next, the program prioritized high-risk medicines. The team did not treat every discrepancy as equally urgent. Anticoagulants were one example. Another key group was insulin, because small dosing errors can cause rapid harm, and patients may not notice a mistake until symptoms appear. Finally, the program focused on patient understanding. A correct list is not enough if the patient cannot follow it. Staff used teachback by asking the patient to explain the plan in their own words. If the explanation was unclear, staff corrected it and checked again. Patients were also given a weekly dose chart showing what to take at different times of day, which reduced reliance on memory at home. To finish, the hospital evaluated the program. Among patients taking multiple medicines, 30-day readmissions fell by 12% after the system was introduced. The point is not that all readmissions are preventable, but that fewer returns were caused by medication confusion, and that is a practical win for patients and services.
Part 4. You will hear a lecturer talking about urban albedo coatings.
Today, I'm going to talk about a simple approach that some cities are using to reduce extreme heat. It is called urban albedo coatings. The idea is easy to understand. Many surfaces in cities are dark, especially roofs, roads, and car parks. Dark surfaces absorb more heat from the sun. They warm up quickly during the day, and they stay warm for a long time afterwards. This is one reason city temperatures can be higher than nearby rural areas, particularly in summer and during heat waves. So what does albedo mean? Albedo is a measure of how much light a surface reflects. A high albedo surface reflects a lot of sunlight. A low albedo surface absorbs more. If you look at a white surface on a sunny day, you can see how bright it is. That brightness is related to reflectivity. Urban albedo coatings are thin layers that are added to an existing surface to increase reflectivity. In simple terms, they help a roof or a road reflect more sunlight and absorb less heat. Let's talk about where these coatings are used. The most commonplace is on flat roofs, especially on large commercial buildings like warehouses, shopping centers, and office blocks. There are a few reasons for this. Roofs are directly exposed to the sun for many hours, and they cover a large area. If you can keep a roof cooler, you can often reduce heat inside the building as well. Coatings can also be used on roads and pavements, but that depends on the local situation, because roads need materials that can handle heavy traffic. In some cases, coatings are also used on building walls, although that is less common. Walls can be more visible to the public, and people sometimes have concerns about appearance. Now, what effects do these coatings have? When a roof reflects more sunlight, the roof surface temperature can drop, sometimes by a large amount on a hot day. That can reduce indoor temperature in rooms just below the roof. The biggest benefit is often seen on the top floor, where the heat from the roof would normally enter the building. If the indoor temperature is lower, people use less air conditioning. That can reduce electricity demand, especially in the afternoon when cooling systems are working hardest. In some cities, cutting peak demand is a major reason for supporting these coatings, because power systems can struggle during heat waves. There can also be wider benefits at the city level. If many buildings in a district use reflective roofs, the overall heat stored in the city can be reduced. That may help lower surface temperatures across a wider area. The change is not the same everywhere, and it depends on building density, weather, and local wind, but the goal is to reduce the intensity of urban heat. People may feel more comfortable outdoors if pavements and surrounding surfaces are cooler, because there's less heat radiating from the ground and buildings. However, there are practical issues, and it is important to be clear about them. The first issue is maintenance. These coatings work best when they're clean. In real cities, surfaces collect dust over time. Dust reduces reflectivity. When the coating becomes dirty, it reflects less sunlight, so its performance drops. Some cities schedule cleaning or recoating, but that adds cost and needs planning. Another issue is glare. If a surface becomes very reflective, bright light can be uncomfortable for people nearby. Glare can affect drivers, pedestrians, and people in buildings that face the coated surface. Because of this, designers sometimes choose materials that are reflective but not highly glossy, and they may avoid certain locations where glare would be a serious problem. So, to sum up, urban albedo coatings are a straightforward way to reduce heat absorption in cities. They are thin layers applied to surfaces, most often roofs, to reflect sunlight. They can help reduce indoor temperature, lower electricity demand for cooling, and in some cases reduce surface temperatures in the wider urban environment. But they need maintenance because dust reduces effectiveness, and planners have to consider glare. In the next part of the lecture, I'll look at how cities decide where to use these coatings and how they measure the results.